Good morning, delegates. We are going to commence the debate in 5 minutes' time, just to allow a few more of your colleagues to arrive. Thank you.
Good morning. I declare open the debate on the emergency item that was included in our agenda this morning, which is entitled Parliamentary Action Against Transnational Organized Crime, Cybercrime and Hybrid Threats to Democracy and Human Security. I think that everyone in this room knows how dangerous for the international peace and security growing transnational organized crime, cybercrime and hybrid threats is. That's why in the 21st century, when we witness escalation of transnational criminals activity, we as parliamentarians from all over the world should respond for this loudly. And I'd like to give you a few words about the organization of the debate. We have time until 10 a.m. this morning for the debate. There is no pre-established list of speakers. If you wish to take the floor, simply fill out one of the inscription forms that we are available on this room and pass it on the into the secretary. In order to enable the highest number of speakers to take the floor within the allocated time, speaking time are set at 4 minutes per speaker. Please make good use of your sense of time and bear with the chair when I tell you, or chair tell you that your speaking time is over. All speakers will take the floor from their seats. I will invite the co-authors of the draft resolution to take the floor at the end of the debate so that they may summarize interventions from the floor and react to them. And at this point, I declare the debate open, and I give the floor to the Honorable Speaker, Thomas Tavares Finton from Jamaica, who will chair the debate. Honorable Speaker, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. And as you heard, the debate is open, and the floor is given to the Netherlands, who will be the first speaker. Please engage your microphone so I can identify you. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Netherlands.
Good morning and thank you. Dear colleagues, the Netherlands welcomes the adoption of this draft resolution. In the same time, let us be clear. Clarity, after all, is the oxygen of truth. While the final text may have chosen softer words, the meaning remains as firm as the principles that inspired its original draft. The resolution, in essence, reaffirms that any use of hybrid means or violation of national airspace constitutes a breach of sovereignty and of international law. That principle does not depend on who commits the act. It depends on the act itself. And we all know which acts and whose ships, drones and aircraft inspired this debate in the first place. By endorsing this text, this Assembly has, perhaps unknowingly, perhaps deliberately, confirmed that aggression cloaked in ambiguity is still aggression. The Netherlands, therefore, interprets this resolution in the spirit of its original intent, as a clear reaffirmation that hybrid attacks, disinformation campaigns, and airspace violations are a violation of the UN Charter, and that states bear full responsibility for such actions, regardless of how they choose to name them. In diplomacy, words may be softened, but principles do not dissolve. And history, dear colleagues, has an impeccable memory for those who stood for them and those who choose to stay silent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Canada. Would you engage your mic, please?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It is my honor to stand and speak quickly to the resolution that we find before us. I think all of our jurisdictions can speak quite vigorously to the challenges that we're seeing on transnational crime, especially when it comes to the proliferation of drugs in our communities that are coming across our borders at an alarming rate, especially in our country of Canada. The larger issue that I do want to underline in my intervention is the issue of cybercrime and the issue of disinformation that seems to pervade through our, I would say, non-media outline. So whether we have information flowing through Facebooks or Twitters, yes, I'm going to name them because they are the ways that our populations are spoken to, and that's where they're getting their information. Well, Mr. Chair, I'm finding, quite honestly, we're seeing far more disinformation and misinformation traveling to our populations and influencing the ways that they're reacting with their governments. In the last couple of elections, I can truly underline the challenges that we've had in misinformation, disinformation campaigns from outside actors of our country to try to influence it in certain directions. So, Mr. Chair, I would say that it is important that we be as strong as we possibly can in this resolution. I agree with my friends from the Netherlands that we should not water this down by any stretch of the imagination, and we should try to include a number of issues when it comes to the proliferation of disinformation, when it comes to cyber issues, cyber attacks, cyber crime, because they come in all shapes and sizes. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. May I just remind that if you wish to take the floor in this debate, you need to fill out the request form. And please do so now so we can move along quickly. The next speaker is Finland. Please engage your mic.
Mr. Chair, the Baltic Sea area has been plagued by an increasing number of hybrid attacks. We have had numerous power and data cables cut by cargo vessels dragging their anchors hundreds of kilometers off the sea floor. We have had several airspace violations by fighter jets and bombers or drones, and we have attacks taking place in the cyberspace. Is this a coincidence that all of a sudden we have seen captains dangerously incompetent in operating their vessels in international waters, or is deliberate actions of sabotage? The same goes with pilots. Have they suddenly become so incompetent that they don't know where they are flying? I don't know which is worse, incompetence of deliberate actions of sabotage. In any case, we parliamentarians from around the world should condemn any deliberate hybrid attacks, be it against infrastructure or taking place in the cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Nobody else has registered to participate. Okay, thank you. Mexico, would you be so kind as to engage your microphone, please? Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, President, distinguished parliamentarians. This is one of the most serious and complex challenges of our times, the growth of transnational organized crime. which is seen in drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, new forms of cybercrime that undermine the security of our states and the integrity of our societies and our airspace. We live in a time when crime is seen not only in weapons, but also in digital networks, cryptocurrencies, data which has been stolen. It moves faster than laws, and it moves beyond borders and the technologies to try to control our judicial systems and traditional networks. So that's why parliamentary action is decisive, and we, parliamentarians, must build an international legal framework that prevents this from happening and that stops impunity becoming globalized ever more while we stick to the domestic framework. We need laws that are coordinated with sanctions and technological measures, international efforts. We're not just talking about punishing, but preventing and maintaining structures that stop criminal gangs from proliferating. These roots that they have, this corruption, these tax havens to money launderer, and we need to protect the most vulnerable, young people who are recruited into crime, women who are victims of trafficking, and communities who live in fear. In cybersecurity, we need to have a global vision where cyberspace doesn't have borders and where the response mustn't be fragmented either. It must be a global, coordinated response. So, fellow parliamentarians, transitional organized crime and cybercrime are not isolated threats. They are interconnected networks which make the most of inequality, corruption, and legal gaps. President Donald Trump of the United States said that drug traffickers were criminal networks, but we need to look at the reality. We need to adapt our legal frameworks to deal with cybercrime and hybrid threats. And we need to share good practices. We need a parliamentary watchdog on cybercrime and cybersecurity and transnational crime, and standards that we need to measure with indicators. So thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam, for that. The next speaker is, again, Canada.
We have the time.
Yes. You'll notice that Canada is speaking twice, but we do have the time. If you wish to participate in the debate, please indicate by filling out a form so we can move smoothly. Thank you. Canada, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, sir. Colleagues, Canada, of course, welcomes this resolution, which is more than vital. Transnational crime is now more sophisticated, more digital, and more dangerous. It is undermining our democracies. We need to make sure that we act together and on three fronts in particular. First of all, when it comes to arms, drugs, and human trafficking, these are not isolated sorts of trafficking. They fund crime and the destabilization of states. We do think we should make emphasize the need to trace funds and to see who benefits from money in order to stop that as a source. Then with respect to parliamentarians, parliaments must have ways of monitoring the situation, cooperating, and ensuring that they can act internationally because this crime knows no borders. And thirdly, we need to be more audacious. We need to share data, best practice, and make the best use of technology, particularly in order to monitor the crypto assets used to launder this money. We do not think that any of this should be done what undermines human rights and a state founded on the rule of law. More transparency, more cooperation, and more parliamentary backbone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Canada. And the next speaker will be from Myanmar, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the Thai delegation submission correctly identifies the unprecedented humanitarian consequences of this crisis, which has subjected hundreds of thousands of people to conditions of modern slavery. The draft resolutions alarm that scam compounds exploiting governance gaps in Myanmar. Since 2021 coup, the breakdown of the rule of law in Myanmar has created vast ungoverned spaces, particularly along our shared border. These borders have become breeding grounds for the transnational criminal organizations that operate with impunity. The humanitarian impact is staggering. Victims from over 70 countries are trafficked, held against their will, and forced to perpetrate scams under the threat of torture and violence. The crisis not only devastates the individual lives, but also fuels a shadow economy whose revenues rival the GDP of several Mekong states, threatening regional stability. To ensure the IPU mobilizes an effective and humanitarian-focused parliamentary response, we urge your committee to emphasize the point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation. And just before we move to the next speaker, I'd like to just pause the discussion to indicate some questions relating to the drafting committee, which is critical in completing the process of this emergency item. Let me remind you that Standing Committee Rule 16 stipulates that the composition of the drafting committee shall take into account equitable geographical distribution and the political and gender balance, and that the number of its members shall not exceed 11. We have received preliminary indications of interest in participating in the drafting committee from a number of delegations, and have also been informed of the decisions taken by the geopolitical groups. These are already submitted: the African Group, Asia Pacific Group, and Latin America. Outstanding, the Arab Group, Eurasia, and 12+. I would invite those geographical groups who have not yet nominated members to the drafting committee to do so on or before 1 p.m. today. Members of the drafting committee are requested to note that they will meet today from 12:30 to 6:30 in the CCV room here in the conference center. The debate continues with So that having been said, there are no more indications of persons willing to or prepared to participate. Suriname? Thank you very much.
Thank you,
have the floor,
Mr.
Suriname.
Chairperson. I wanted to reflect on some issues, like the first one, when we talk about speaking of drug trafficking. I stated yesterday, I think, and the day before yesterday, it's very useful to look at drug trafficking. But when you go to the root cause, let's see the countries who produces the chemicals because without those chemicals, we cannot produce a lot of drugs in a lot of developing countries. We have to take that also into consideration, the chairperson, on those issues. The next point I wanted to raise is the discrimination. When you look at the root causes of vulnerability, including poverty and inequality, there is, for a lot of countries, a lot of discrimination when it goes to financial issues. Like, what is the rent?
Interest.
The interest which a lot of countries pay, the developing countries especially, is higher than a lot of and highly industrialized countries pay to the financial institutions, and that creates inequality and poverty, Mr. Chairperson. And I can go on like this, that the world is very unequal. When it regards to foreign interference in democratic institutions, we as Suriname are victims on that, on foreign interference from Western Europe, my chairperson. I hope that this will be stressed, that foreign interference in local issues and democratic institutions must be avoided at any cost, mainly in the election period. You see that happens a lot, Mr. Chairperson. When it comes to the protection of parliamentarians and request the IPU Committee on Human Rights of Parliamentarians to monitor and document attacks against them, let's start to create facilities that the parliamentarians from the SIDS, the small island developing states, can participate in these international fora. The SIDS, a lot of SIDS countries cannot participate because they don't have the financial possibilities. So I once again ask the board and the elite of the IPU to facilitate at least one member of a small island developing states to participate, to be able to participate in the IPU. Otherwise, you don't there's no point of inclusion of these small and island developing states. And this is a huge point of discrimination, my chair. I thank you for your attention, and I hope that my points will be taken note of that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think the point that you are making is that the small island developing states are extremely subject to the very things that we are talking about in this emergency resolution. Our next speaker is? Well, if there are no other speakers, we are closing the debate with a presentation from Thailand. So if there are no other speakers, I'm going to invite Thailand to take the floor. I'm beginning to feel like an auctioneer. For second and last call. That's it. Thailand, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, on behalf of the delegation of Thailand, I wish to express our sincere appreciation to all member parliaments for supporting the inclusion of this emergency item. Your support reflects our shared recognition that transnational organized crime, cybercrime, and hybrid threats are no longer distant concerns. They are clear and present dangers to democracy, human rights, and global stability. Mr. Chair, this resolution is born out of an alarming reality. Across Southeast Asia and beyond, we have witnessed the rise of industrial-scale cyber scam compound, criminal complex that traffic and enslave hundreds of thousands of people, forcing them to commit cybercrime under threat of torture and detention. These criminal economies now generate up to $75 billion annually, rivaling the GDP of entire nations. But this is not only a regional issue. It is a global phenomenon, now expanding into Africa, South Asia, and even Europe, where organized crime, cyber attack, disinformation, and hybrid threat began to converge. The line between criminality and political warfare has blurred. Mr. Chair, we are the guardian of democratic institutions, the defenders of human rights, and the bridge between law and justice. Colleagues, Our resolution also acknowledged the emergency of hybrid threat, including cyber-enabled sabotage, disinformation campaigns, transnational drug cartels, and attacks on critical infrastructure, which collectively erode public trust and undermine national sovereignty. When such tactics are orchestrated or supported by state or non-state actors, they may constitute violation of international law and in certain circumstances acts of international terrorism. Parliament must therefore ensure that all countermeasures, digital, legal, or security-related, remain firmly grounded in international human rights and humanitarian law. In defending our democracies, we must not abandon the very value that define them. Mr. Chair, this resolution is more than a call for action. It is a parliamentary shield for democracy, for truth, and for human dignity. It reaffirms that organized crime and hybrid threat cannot be confronted by government alone. They require legislative vigilance, transnational solidarity, and the moral leadership of parliaments. Thailand stands ready to work with all member parliaments to ensure that this resolution becomes a living framework, one that protects people, restores accountability, and strengthens the democracy fabric of our societies. Let us act together for democracy, for security, and for human rights. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much to all members who participated in the debate. Thank you for keeping to your time, and thank you for the useful and insightful presentations from you all. The debate is now closed, and I'm informed that we are moving straight into the general debate immediately. So thank you very much for your attention, and more importantly, for your cooperation during the emergency items. Thank you again.
Good morning, Excellencies, the speakers and honorable members, distinguished delegates. My name is Jabulani Mabuza, the Speaker of the House of Assembly of the Kingdom of Eswatini. We are hereby commencing our general debates, and I will start by Sweden. But let me remind you, colleagues, that the time is very important. And as I am chairing this session, I'm going to remind you in case you exceed the allocated time. Sweden, you may continue and will be followed by Bahamas.
The floor is mine. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, fellow parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen. It was only a few blocks from here that the headquarters of the League of United Nations was founded in the aftermath of the First World War. With the horrors of the war in fresh memory, an organization was established with a bold ambition of putting an end to war and violating of human rights. However, there are a high number of armed conflicts around the world today. Actually, more than 120, according to the figures of IPU. And this means suffering among civilians, including women and children and other vulnerable groups. Leaders of several nations have chosen war over cooperation. Around the world, we are witnessing violation of norms and standards that we all have committed to uphold in the area of international humanitarian law. We are also witnessing the most significant conflict on the European continent since World War II. It's the first time since the World War II that a European country have attacked another country. Russia's aggressive, unprovoked war against Ukraine is a blatant attack on international humanitarian law and rule-based order that was established by the United Nations in the aftermath of the Second World War II. Supporting Ukraine is my country's top foreign policy priority. All parties in the Swedish parliament stand behind Ukraine. Our commitment to Ukraine's security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity remains firm. Sweden, together with our European allies, will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And we support Ukraine's right to its territory, to its self-determination and integrity. Russia is waging a war against one nation, Ukraine, but in doing so, it's violating the principles of international law that underpin the security of all of us. It is in our common interest that the rule-based world order and international law are upheld. International law is crystal clear. There can be no rewards for aggression. The UN Charter, which enshrines the fundamental principles of sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and political independence of all states, remains critical. Needless to say, Sweden welcomes efforts to put an end to Russia's war in Ukraine and achieve a just and lasting peace and safeguards Ukraine's security and territory, as well as stability in all Europe. We don't need any hybrid war. We don't want to have the drones over and in our territory. And this means a peace that is in accordance with the UN Charter and that ensures that Russia will not attack Ukraine again or any other. The Swedish speaker will, together with the chairman of the Verkhovna Rada, host the 4th Parliamentarian Summit of the Crimea Platform in Stockholm, the 23rd to 24th of November. We urge all invited speakers of Parliament to register, and I am very pleased to know that Madam President Tulia Axon as well have signed up to take part in the Crimea platform in Stockholm. Thank you very much for this important registration. But let me also say that the Swedish support of Ukraine goes beyond military defense, and it's based on human rights and ensuring service for 23 million people on the survey of a clear and support for the humanitarian. But let me say in the last seconds that we as politicians, we can make a difference. We can make a difference with our debates, with our lawmaking, but also in cooperation with NGOs, with the civil society, with business, and everybody in the society who are engaged. And let's continue to work for peace and stability. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Sweden. May I now hand the floor to India. India, you have the floor.
Honorable Chair, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Namaste, a very good morning to all of you. Humanitarian principles, as you all know, form the very foundation of our shared humanity and human civilization. I would like to start with a couplet of Sanskrit verse shlokas. Paropkaraya phalanti vriksha, paropkaraya vahanti nadya, paropkaraya duhanti gava, paropkarartha mid shariram. Meaning, trees bear fruit for the benefit of others, rivers flow for the benefit of others, cow milk for the benefit of others. This body is also meant for the service of others. This verse speaks volume of spiritual richness of Indian philosophy that guides the mankind to work for the welfare and the upliftment of others. Today we are witnessing an alarming rise in the conflict, crisis and disasters, each devastating millions worldwide. At a time when unity and collective actions are crucial, global humanitarian efforts face serious challenges. International humanitarian assistance is declining, multilateralism is in crisis, and growing mistrust in international institutions is further weakening the global response to major humanitarian needs. In these trying times, India provides a hope. Yes, India provides a hope for the world. India's approach to humanitarian action is shaped by civilizational ethos, strategic interest, and evolving global role. While India supports humanitarian norms and assistance, it does so through a lens of non-interference, pluralism, and regional stability. The ancient ideal of Vasudevaya Kutumbakam, the world is one family, has been the guiding light of India's humanitarian efforts. My dear friends, distinguished delegates, India has always upheld humanitarian principles. We ratified the Geneva Convention in 1950. As a strong votary of multilateralism, India has been a founding member of the UN, ILO, NAM, and G77 and many other such multilateral institutions. A champion of decolonization, India has stood against the apartheid, and today we are raising the voice of Global South. India strongly advocates for comprehensive reform of multilateral institutions. As the largest working democracy of the world, India believes global decision-making must be more inclusive and representative. Acknowledging the increasing shortfall in humanitarian funding, we urge the governments, international agencies, corporates, and other stakeholders to enhance support to the UN humanitarian assistance system. India also calls for greater global cooperation to save lives and provide safe, sustained, and timely supply of essential humanitarian assistance to those affected by the disasters and conflicts. India has significantly contributed to 49 of 71 UN peacekeeping missions, with over 200,000 personnel servicing worldwide, making us one of the largest troop contributors. In 2007, we proudly deployed the first all-women peacekeeping contingent, which has trained. In India, we have trained more than 93 countries and their women forces. Our Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation, ITEC program, offers over 12,000 scholarships annually to professionals of developing countries, covering more than 300 plus courses across 120 premier institutions in India. During the COVID-19 pandemic, under the Vaccine Maitri program, India supplied 301 million vaccine doses to 100 plus countries, gifting more than 15 million doses. Our Arogya Maitri initiative continues to provide essential medicines to nations in crisis. India has emerged as a first responder in global crisis. In the past 5 years, India has extended humanitarian aid to over 150 countries. These operations reflect our ethos, service before self. Domestically, India has built a robust disaster management framework through the Disaster Management Act of 2005. The National Disaster Response Force, with 16,000 plus trained personnel, have saved more than 159,000 lives and evacuated close to 1 million people from disaster-stricken areas both within country and outside the country. Our disaster response is backed by a strong financing mechanism, which include the National Disaster Risk Management Fund and the SDRMF, which is the State Disaster Risk Management Fund, the PM Care Fund, corporate social responsibility contributions, and initiatives by the NGOs. I'll just take 30 seconds more. While India believes that the primary responsibility to aid lies with the national governments, we firmly uphold that the principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality,
India,
and independence in
India,
responding
please
to
conclude.
all humanitarian institutions. Fellow parliamentarians, every human being deserves a life of dignity. I hope you agree with me. Every human being deserves a life of dignity. Who believes in that can raise their hands. And let us rise above divisions and recommit ourselves to the service of humanity. And let us pledge to uplift the distressed and stand by those in need.
India.
Thank you. Jai Hind.
Your time is up. Thank you very much, India. Our next speaker is Myanmar. Myanmar, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Honorable President, distinguished delegates. I stand before you on behalf of the people of Myanmar, represented by the committee representing Pirangsu Hluttaw, the democratically elected representative of our nations, who continue to uphold the mandate given to us. Today, Myanmar endures one of the gravest humanitarian crises of our time, a crisis not of nature, but of human cruelty. Since the military coup in Myanmar, the junta has waged war against its own citizens. Over 6,800 civilians have been killed, 22,000 arbitrarily detained, and more than 5 million displaced. Entire villages have been destroyed, and airstrikes have targeted schools, hospitals, and places of worship. In addition to the manufactured political crisis, Myanmar has suffered devastating natural disasters, including Typhoon Yagi and the March 2025 earthquake, which claims over 5,300 lives. Despite these tragedies, the military has conducted more than 600 attacks during supposed ceasefire, prioritizing political control over the welfare of its citizens. These actions constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. The hunters continue to target civilians, obstruct humanitarian access, and weaponizing aid, violating fundamental principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. Under these situations, the planned elections in December further deepened the crisis. These fake elections are an attempt to legitimize military rule. On the other hand, the junta controls less than 40% of the territory, while political opponents are imprisoned and the media are silent. Myanmar people clearly reject these illegitimate elections and remain steadfast in their demand for democracy. Honorable Presidents, distinguished delegates, as parliamentarians, we face a test of conscious neutrality in the face of atrocity is complexity. So therefore, I respectfully urge you all to take the following actions: rejecting the military's sham elections, and reaffirm the IPU's recognitions of the committee representing Piraungsu Hluttaw and Myanmar's elected representative as the legitimate parliamentary interlocutor, and demand the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners, including our leaders, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and President U Win Myint, all detained parliamentarians, and demanding immediate and impedient humanitarian access across all territory, and imposing comprehensive sanctions, including arms and jet fuel embargoes, and to support Myanmar's democratic and ethnic stakeholders for a realistic solutions on the current conflict and for a peaceful future. Dear friends and distinguished delegates, let us not allow dictatorships to be disguised as democracy. Let us not allow humanitarianism to be hostage to tyranny. And then let us, with the compassions and convictions for the people of Myanmar and for all those suffering under compassions. And so thank you so much for your kind attentions, and thank you so much for your solidarity with the people of Myanmar and our fight for democracy and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Myanmar. The next speaker is IDLO, International Development Law Organization.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, honorable members of Parliament, I am pleased to take the floor on behalf of the International Development Law Organization, the only global intergovernmental organization devoted exclusively to promoting the rule of law for peace and sustainable development. Humanitarian crises happen where justice systems are weak, where laws exclude, and where trust in institutions has eroded. This is why strengthening the rule of law is essential. Effective legal systems can prevent crises and violent conflict, provide the space for humanitarian actors to operate safely, and create pathways for communities to move from emergency response towards lasting peace and sustainable development. Across the world, IDLO supports states to build these enabling environments by working with parliaments, governments, justice institutions, and communities to promote legal reform, strengthen judicial capacity, and ensure that justice is accessible and fair, even in fragile and crisis contexts. Honorable members, parliaments play a vital role in this effort. As guardians of the rule of law, you translate humanitarian principles into national legislation, ensure that budgets protect those in need, and that laws are fair, clear, and non-discriminatory. By promoting participatory and transparent lawmaking, you help rebuild trust between people and institutions, the very foundation of peace. IDLO remains committed to working with you to reinforce the global humanitarian system through stronger legal frameworks, principled governance, and inclusive, people-centered justice. In these challenging times, upholding humanity requires commitment to the rule of law. IDLO is at your side in this noble endeavor. I thank you.
Thank you very much, IDLO. And the next speaker is the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Union for Mediterranean. He's not there. Morning.
السادة المنصة الكريمة سيدات والسادة الحضور اسمحوا لي في البداية.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished delegates, in my own capacity and on behalf of my colleagues, members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Union for the Mediterranean, which brings together 43 countries, allow me to say how pleased I am to take part in this discussion. In a world today marked by rampant challenges, we have spoken up very clearly to protect peace and to promote solidarity. We've seen that we can only see development when conflicts are resolved with sustainable agreements. Allow me to refer to the initiative led by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar that has led to the Sharm el-Sheikh peace plan to put an end to the war in Gaza, and that was signed about a week ago. The Sharm el-Sheikh summit confirmed that dialogue must prevail over weapons and violence. And it's more proof that diplomacy is the solution. The peace isn't just the peace plan isn't just a political agreement, but peace is a humanitarian system based on justice and respect. The Sharm el-Sheikh agreement doesn't just bring in a ceasefire, but it promotes peace in the whole Middle East region and is good for the well-being of the whole region and brings benefits for trade, education, and strengthens regional stability. We have expressed our support for Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's plan, which has also demonstrated Egypt's commitment to regional stability, security, and dialogue. We also welcome President Donald Trump's involvement, which has, for the time being, brought back peace to this very troubled region. And at this August Assembly, allow me to send out a message to the Presidents of Egypt and the United States and all of the other heads of state who met in Sharm el-Sheikh, and allow us inviting Palestine and Israel to respect the terms of the agreement and protect peace. That's an international and moral imperative for all of us in order to establish a new period of collaboration and well-being. Parliamentarians shouldn't just stand back and watch what is happening. They must actively engage in creating history and in mobilizing parliamentary capacity to defend peace, real peace, with respect for human dignity. I invite you to accept this peace plan. Thank you.
And the next speaker is PNND, the Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament.
Bonjour à toutes et tous.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. President, dear colleagues, let's be clear. The nuclearization of the world is the biggest threat to humanity. And as a former Swiss parliamentarian, it's an honor for me to represent parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. A global network of parliamentarians working together on initiatives designed to promote nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. Nuclear weapons could bring human disasters far more powerful than that suffered by Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki those years ago, and the recent disaster of Fukushima. Allow me to refer to the statement made by a colleague from Japan yesterday. That's why last Friday, on the 17th of October, Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament launched an urgent appeal on for a day of nuclear disarmament at the United Nations. And it's a call that was signed by more than 600 organizations and more than 1,200 people from 99 different countries. A call with 5 key points. Allow me to quote them. We, the undersigned, call on the leaders of all levels of governance, local, municipal, state, national, and regional, to affirm that the threat or use of nuclear weapons is unacceptable. 2, to promote tangible measures by nuclear states and their allies to implement this obligation by disactivating their nuclear forces and adopting policies designed never to unleash a nuclear war. 3, to undertake to achieve nuclear disarmament at the latest at the 100th anniversary of the UN in 2045, and immediately take steps through multilateral negotiation to implement that commitment. 4, to cut budgets allocated to nuclear weapons and put an end to public and private investment in the nuclear weapon industry. And 5, to redirect those funds to strengthening the United Nations, promoting peacekeeping and dispute resolution, and accelerate climate measures. And to conclude, it's important that the United States accepts the Russian offer to prolong the agreement between the United States and the Russian Federation beyond the 5th of February 2026 until the 5th of February 2027 within the New START 2010 treaty. So, dear colleagues, all you need to do to join our organization is go to the website pnnd.org. It's available in 6 languages, and you can sign up whenever you like. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you very much, PNND. And the next speaker is Parliamentary Assembly of Turkic States.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen. As a Secretary General, I am very delighted to represent here, in the capacity of observer, the Parliamentary Assembly of Turkic States. In short, Turkpa, it's a great honor to address this distinguished assembly today. Turkpa is a parliamentary dimension of Turkic cooperation, and while implementing its mandate, Turkpa attached particular significance to the exploring opportunities for constructive engagement with regional and the global interparliamentary organizations. In this context, I'd like to mention that Turkpa has been participating in the IPU activities as an observer since 20 2011. The Inter-parliamentary Union platform provides a great opportunity to share the views on the issues of global agenda, including those in the field of the humanitarian policy. Every day we live, we witness the reality that violations of humanitarian norms continued around the world, whether through countless ongoing conflicts and war, or through the process related to climate change and migration. All these factors have a significant impact on humanitarian norms. There are one of the most important issues on the agenda of leading international organizations in the recent years, since they cause profound humanitarian suffering and challenge the very foundation of international law and solidarity. The current global situation is requiring to take concrete actions to uphold humanitarian norms and ensure protection for the most vulnerable. Governments, parliaments, and international organizations must act together to translate humanitarian commitments into real and effective measures on the ground, since they are the very foundation of peace, stability, and dignity. Therefore, these challenges are not issues to be resolved by individual states, but within the framework of international cooperation. This is a responsibility of all nations, parliaments, governments, and peoples. In this context, participation of Turkey in such an event is very important. Cooperation of Turkic states with other neighbors in the Euro-Asian space and a good neighborly policy contribute to the formation of common approach to problems. In conclusion, I'd like to note that Turkey stands ready to deepen cooperation with Inter-parliamentary Union and other parliamentary platforms to further expand the frontiers of international cooperation, and is open to collaboration with other international organizations to discuss the issues of mutual interest, including those related to the upholding and supporting humanitarian norms. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Takpa. And the next speaker is COPAL, Permanent Conference of Political Parties in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then it will be the
A very good morning. Distinguished parliamentarians, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to say a few words on behalf of the Permanent Conference of Political Parties in Latin America and the Caribbean, COPAL. On behalf of President, Mexican Senator Alejandro Moreno Cardenas, who has led our organization at this important parliamentary forum. COPAL is a regional organization created in 1979 with more than 100 political parties from the progressive wing in countries in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. We have the following aims: to protect and strengthen democracy, peace, disarmament and human rights, social justice, integration, and the defense of national sovereignty and self-determination. I wish to share some thoughts with you about an unavoidable reality and a very painful one, the situation of human rights in Latin America and the Caribbean. A region with such great culture and potential, but with a very complex and challenging history in ensuring fundamental freedoms and rights for its peoples. The current situation faced in certain countries in the region is the constant struggle against impunity and abuse of power, a lack of access to justice, and structural discrimination. There is the highest rate of murders anywhere in the world, criminality, extrajudicial killings, forced disappearances, and gender violence, very high rates of feminicide. And these things destroy lives, and there is great fear among our people. We're also seeing the militarization of public security in certain countries. And very often, we're seeing an increase in abuses and a lack of accountability more generally. We observe with great concern democratic backsliding in many countries with leaders who, once they've been elected, destroy the institutional guarantees and try to undermine the independence of the judiciary, which is promoting authoritarianism and a systematic violation of human rights. And one example is the case of Mexico, where the judicial reform was described as a regressive attempt to undermine the independence of the judicial branch. Like Mexico, there are various countries in the region where currently the freedom of expression is under threat. Journalists and human rights defenders are stigmatized, persecuted, and sometimes even assassinated. Latin America is marked by profound inequality and discrimination affecting historically vulnerable groups, such as indigenous peoples and persons of African descent. In that terrible context, the struggle for dignity remains alive. Civil society, international organizations, and parliaments continue to defend human rights bravely. And that's why we have the following commitments: strengthening democracy and justice, demanding that states respect organizations like the UN and the Organization of American States and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The fight against poverty and food insecurity are also concerns in terms of economic, social, and cultural rights. We issue a call to work together to deal with the root causes of violence and inequality, because the time is now to defend free lives and liberty for everyone, not only in Latin America and the Caribbean, but all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is the UN World Food Programme.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to speak on behalf of the World Food Programme today. The world is facing historic and alarming milestones for the first time since the creation of a measure called the International Food Security Phase Classification. We have two concurrent famines, one in Sudan, one in Palestine. This is not a natural disaster. This is a man-made crisis driven by conflict and compounded by restricted humanitarian access. More than 300 million people are facing acute hunger. This has more than doubled in 5 years. We know what it takes to defeat famine. Where World Food Programme and partners have sustained access, food insecurity and malnutrition rates drop. But we need two things. We need access and we need resources. Unfortunately, both are under severe pressure. With an estimated 30% reduction in humanitarian funding in 2025 and consistent attacks on humanitarian principles, the humanitarian ecosystem is at a breaking point. Funding shortfalls could push an additional 10 to 15 million people into catastrophic hunger. Already, we are seeing devastating consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, each day the World Food Programme and our humanitarian partners reach the most vulnerable in the most complex situations. Since the ceasefire in Gaza, we have ensured that bread is already reaching 500,000 people each day. We are working to scale operations with our partners to ensure we reach those in need. We continue to reach new communities who have been under siege in Sudan, and we work around the world with national governments to serve their communities. The Inter-parliamentary Union is an essential partner in continuing to ensure this response and ensuring we can have the impact on people's lives. The IPU not only helps us to deliver assistance, but demonstrate how this global solidarity is relevant to your citizens, to your electorate. Your leadership helps to mobilize the political will to secure resources and protect humanitarian principles, And together with the World Food Program, we can work together to prevent hunger and save millions of lives. Thank you again for the opportunity to address the Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Azerbaijan.
Honorable President, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, humanitarian crisis, whether triggered by armed conflicts or natural disasters, continue to affect millions of people worldwide. Women, children, and other vulnerable groups are disproportionately affected. Parliaments play a central role in this endeavor. We must mobilize political will, champion inclusive governance, and promote dialogue across societies. A multi-sectoral, inclusive, and equitable approach is essential. We must safeguard humanitarian actions in times of crisis, ensure the integrity of international humanitarian law, and reaffirm our commitment to multilateral efforts. Parliament must act together to mobilize international organizations for rapid responses and keep humanitarian issues high on the agenda. The IPU, for its part, could consider establishing a working group or holding an extraordinary meeting to address this shortcoming. As to my country, Azerbaijan, it has consistently upheld these principles. Azerbaijan is deeply committed to protecting human rights in conflict situations. Azerbaijan has been a main co-sponsor at the UN General Assembly in its adopting a resolution on missing persons since 2002 and supports the UN Commission on the Status of Women resolution on the release of women and children taken hostage in armed conflicts. In September 2023, Azerbaijan hosted its first international conference on clarifying the fate of missing persons, making the International Day of the Victims of Enforced Disappearances. Humanitarian work must respect equity as much as equality. As the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies notes, humanitarian assistance must adapt to the needs and backgrounds of those affected to ensure genuine equality in access and participation. Also, humanitarian aid must remain free from political influence to preserve its role as a livelihood for human dignity, development, and stability. Let us reaffirm our collective commitment to humanitarian norms, support those affected, and strengthen the international system to respond quickly and fairly to crisis. Together, through joint effort, legislative action, and multilateral cooperation, we can ensure that humanitarian action remains effective, equitable, and above all, human. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Belarus. And please, you are reminded of the limit timer as you do your presentation. It's just in front of you.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We are witnessing an unprecedented rise in international tensions, driven by the complex process shaping a new multipolar world order. Today, the call for justice is more relevant than ever. Peoples who have endured the yoke of colonialism and have been most severely affected by devastating wars are advocating for peace, sovereign equality, and the right to independently determine their own destinies and path for progressive development. Belarus welcomes the strengthening of new centers of multipolarity, such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS, the constructive role of many other organizations, including our Inter-parliamentary Union. However, there are forces and certain political elites that impede the formation of this new world order, disregard international law, encourage arms races, wage sanction wars, interfere in the internal affairs of states, sustain active conflicts, and obstruct peace initiatives. These destabilizing factors amplify tangible challenges and threats to international peace and security, and give rise to numerous humanitarian crises, sometimes shocking by their brutality and cynicism. Since independence, Belarus has pursued a peaceful foreign policy and has always advocated a safer world. We are convinced that in the context of geopolitical turmoil, it is essential to place the principles of good neighborhood, equal and mutually respectful dialogue at the heart of the interstate relations. Over the past years, my country has actively promoted an initiative to launch a broad dialogue on security and cooperation in the spirit of San Francisco, which was proposed by President of my country, Alexander Lukashenko. Today, together with our partners, we are working on the development of the Eurasian Charter for Diversity and Multipolarity in the 21st century, which aims to reduce tensions in the military political sphere, as well as strengthen humanitarian dimension. Parliamentary diplomacy, with its eminent potential, can and must contribute to building bridges of mutual understanding, respect, friendship, and solidarity. Our delegation is ready to cooperate in this direction with all parliamentarians. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Belarus. And the next speaker is Suriname. Suriname, you have the floor.
Honorable Chair, distinguished colleague, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to address this assembly on behalf of the Parliament of Republic of Suriname. We align ourselves with the statement delivered earlier by our delegation and reaffirm Suriname's deep commitment to upholding humanitarian norms and strengthening humanitarian actions in all its forms. Today, humanity faces multiple and overlapping crises as armed conflicts, food insecurity, forced migration, public health emergencies, and accelerating impact of climate change. These challenges test not only the capacity of our institution, but also the strength of our competition. Suriname is a small developing state, but with a large responsibility. As one of the world's few carbon-negative countries, we continue to protect our 93% of our forests, a living shield for the planet and for the future generations. Yet, despite this global contribution, our people face the humanity consequence of the climate change every year as flooding, coastal erosion, and displacement of families in our interior regions. For us, climate change is not merely an environmental issue, it is a humanitarian crisis affecting homes, livelihoods, and entire communities. That's why Suriname calls for stronger international commitment. We argue our partnership to simplify, to go for example, the Green Climate Fund and prioritize grants over loans, because no nation should go into debt for protecting the earth. Parliaments, including ours, must ensure that such resources are used transparently and effectively. Honorable Chair, humanitarian norms remind us the solidarity and it's not charity, it is justice. Suriname stands ready to work with all IPU members to turn compassion into concrete action.
Suriname,
Stronger,
your time
yes,
is
stronger partnership
up.
for fair
Please
financing
conclude,
and
sir.
sustainable investment in humanitarian and climate resilience. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is from Kenya. Kenya, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you greetings from the citizens and Parliament of the Republic of Kenya. As you're all aware, Kenya is still in the throes of deep grief following the passing of the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, a former Prime Minister, a long-serving parliamentarian, and one of Africa's most inspirational leaders, who was interred last Sunday. In life, Right Honorable Odinga was a true champion of peace and democracy, rule of law and equality, an outstanding defender of human rights and constitutionalism, and unwavering Pan-Africanist. During his tenure as the African Union High Representative for Infrastructure Development, Raila Amolo Odinga believed in a peaceful, united, and interconnected Africa, where citizens move freely in pursuit of their dreams and livelihoods, and where leadership is inspired by accountability, good governance, and selfless service. In his passing, we celebrate an icon who tirelessly gave a voice to the voiceless and whose devotion to making the world a better place for humanity will echo down the ages for generations to come. I thank all of you, individually and collectively, for standing with Kenya and Africa at the most difficult and painful moment. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to sincerely commend the Inter-parliamentary Union for convening this timely discussion framed by the theme of upholding humanitarian norms and supporting humanitarian action in times of crisis, a theme that resonates deeply with the realities facing our world today. In every region, humanity continues to be tested by conflicts, climate-induced disasters, pandemics, food insecurity, forced displacement, and economic instability. These crises demand not only our compassion, but also resolute political will and coordinated parliamentary action. In Kenya, we have integrated humanitarian consideration into national legislative agenda, while diligently deploying parliamentary diplomacy. We have enacted laws and established frameworks that strengthen disaster preparedness, facilitate humanitarian assistance, and safeguard the rights of displaced persons and vulnerable communities. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to consolidate these gains and advance this worthy cause further, the Parliament of Kenya commits to do the following: strengthen domestic laws to align fully with international humanitarian obligations, enhance oversight to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches those most in need, promote inclusivity by engaging women, youth, and marginalized groups in humanitarian decision-making, and lastly, support diplomatic efforts aimed at upholding the integrity of IHL across all nations. As we deliberate here in Geneva, the cradle of human action, let us reaffirm our shared responsibility to humanity. The challenges before us transcend borders, so must our solutions. Through solidarity, multilateral cooperation, and parliamentary leadership, we can build a world that upholds the sanctity of life, even in the darkest of times. May the spirit of humanity continue to guide our parliaments and our collective actions. Mr. Chairman, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, from Kenya. And our next speaker is Australia. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker Mabuza of Eswatini. Dear colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be with you as a delegate for Australia. We signed the 1949 Geneva Convention in 1950, and Australia has ratified 3 additional protocols. We know that under international humanitarian law, attacks, harassment, intimidation, and arbitrary detention of humanitarian personnel, as well as the destruction and misappropriation and looting of relief objects, are prohibited. Yet in the contributions we have heard from our colleagues, it is sad that these things continue to this day. Australia made a voluntary pledge to report on domestic implementation of international humanitarian law. Its most recent report was published in October of last year. The Speaker of the Australian Parliament, the Honourable Milton Dick, has made a number of contributions in this gathering here of the 151st gathering of the IPU, indicating Australia's leadership through Senator Wong, our Foreign Minister, in making sure that we move to a landmark declaration for the protection of humanitarian personnel focused on practical steps to protect workers in conflict zones. Surely we can all agree that those who go to help, those who are in times of dire need, will receive the support that they need. In the Asia-Pacific region, Australia, in solidarity with our Asian brothers and sister nations, are investing in everything that we can do to ensure humanitarian action is provided. Australia is now one of the largest donors to the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, which is a major threat to stability in the Indo-Pacific region. Australia is providing life-saving assistance to displaced and conflict-affected people across Myanmar and to the Rohingyas and their host communities in Bangladesh. We have also committed over $1.25 billion. And if I can close, Mr. Speaker and President of this Assembly today, to note that the gap between the need and funding is widening. In 2024, the UN appealed for $5 billion and only received 45% of it. Given our discussions about humanitarian need, I urge all countries to make as much of a contribution as is possible. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Australia. Our next speaker is the Republic of Korea.
Honourable delegates, good morning. I am Hwang Hee, member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea. Human society is at a pivotal moment of transformation. The AI-driven technological era of the fourth industrial revolution is set to enhance productivity dramatically, promising unprecedented leaps that are difficult to fully grasp. The rapid pace of technological advancement is transforming societal norms and structures so quickly that traditional standards and orders are struggling to keep up. Post-truth and political social polarization are fostering distrust and inequality, creating an extreme confrontational structure of conflict and opposition. The rapid technological progress and widening social divides are increasing global uncertainty, hinting at a restructuring of power dynamics. It is an era of multilateral conflicts and survival of the fittest. The international order, once built on consensus, is being disrupted, and climate change caused by environmental degradation pose a direct threat to human survival. War, terrorism, drugs, and violence have driven countless people to fear and suffering. Exclusive ownership of resources and environmental values have become economic weapons and tools of dominance. Human civilization has achieved wealth and prosperity, but there also has been an increase in conflict and confrontation. The upcoming era of technological leaps in the Fourth Industrial Revolution promises highly efficient means of production and increased productivity unlike any previous industrial revolutions. However, looking at human history, the outcome of the Fourth Industrial Revolution may bring about even greater conflicts and confrontations. This is a critical moment where the international community must work together. I suggest promoting more active cultural exchange between countries with the IPU playing a leading role. Culture represents the collective values accumulated and shared over time within a national community. Therefore, cultural exchange can foster shared values among global citizens. Countries must actively promote their culture policies and engage in cultural exchange. Cultural exchange will enhance shared understanding and solidarity among global citizens. Through cultural exchange, we can turn potential periods of intense conflict into periods of reconciliation, cooperation, and connection. Parliaments representing the rights and well-being of citizens can take the lead. The IPU has a responsibility to fulfill this role. As a concrete initiative, I propose the establishment of a Cultural Olympics led by the IPU and the IOC. The fundamental spirit of the Olympic is to strive for peace through the participation, empathy, and solidarity of global citizens. South Korea's Hallyu Korean Wave is the only historical example of a nation that has never invaded another country, yet has spread its culture to all corners of the world. South Korea is proving that through culture, global citizens can create values of empathy, solidarity, peace, and cooperation. Parliaments must take an active role, and the IPU is the only institution that can lead in this endeavor. Thank you for your attention.
Bahamas, you have the floor.
Thank you. Chair, Excellencies, the Bahamas is honored to participate in this debate, which strikes at the conscience of our shared humanity. As conflicts multiply and humanitarian needs reach record levels, the call to uphold the norms that protect human dignity has never been more urgent. Civilians today bear the cost of a record number of armed conflicts, with over 123 million people forcibly displaced, according to the 2025 UN Global Humanitarian Overview. Even hospitals and relief workers are under attack. The Geneva Conventions, born from the ashes of World War, were meant to draw a moral line in the sand, yet that line is being blurred before our eyes. For the Bahamas and other small island development states, the need for humanitarianism extends beyond conflict. Climate change is, for us, the violence of intensifying hurricanes, rising seas, and economic shocks that threaten lives and livelihoods. It deprives people of food, water, and shelter, displaces communities, and deepens inequality. To speak of humanitarian action today, we must necessarily confront the climate emergency and its humanitarian consequences. In Haiti, our Caribbean neighbor, we witness the tragic convergence of security and humanitarian cases. As a member of CARICOM, the Bahamas stands in solidarity with Haiti and supports regional and international efforts to restore peace and stability. We welcome Security Council Resolution 2793, transitioning the multinational security support mission into a gang suppression force with a more robust UN-authorized mandate. And we urge sustained contributions to the UN Trust Fund. The Haitian crisis is more than a regional security challenge. It's a test of our collective humanity. As parliamentarians, we must remind the world that humanitarian action begins with political will. the choice to fund relief rather than fuel war, to uphold law rather than weaken it, and to defend human dignity, including in times of crisis. In the Bahamas, we've taken concrete steps to strengthen our human rights, humanitarian and resilience frameworks. In March of this year, the Bahamas established the first Parliamentary Human Rights Committee, ensuring oversight of rights protection and alignment with international standards, including in emergencies. We've also established the Disaster Risk Management Authority through comprehensive legislation providing for comprehensive mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery, including the development of national humanitarian assistance standards. Our National Youth Guard is also training young Bahamians to assist in disaster preparedness and relief. Internationally, the Bahamas also contributes within our capacity to the International Committee of the Red Cross, reaffirming our commitment to global humanitarian principles and action. Excellencies, effective international humanitarian action requires cooperation. However, the international community is facing a crisis of multilateralism, a crisis of trust. The social contract of global cooperation, built on solidarity, fairness, and shared responsibility, must be renewed. This renewal calls for reinvigorated multilateralism, where global systems deliver not only for the powerful, but also for the vulnerable. Let us therefore reaffirm our collective resolve to protect the integrity of international humanitarian law, to champion inclusive, people-centered policies for women, children, and persons in vulnerable situations, to advance climate justice as a humanitarian imperative, and to strengthen parliamentary diplomacy as a bridge of solidarity. Excellencies, the task before us is moral as it is political. We must rekindle multilateralism as a shared social contract grounded in human rights, justice, and respect for humanitarian norms, to translate principles into life-saving action that restores hope and dignity to those most in need. Allow me to end by paying tribute to humanitarian workers around the world, from those in conflict zones to those supporting hurricane-stricken islands. For their courage, compassion, and selfless service, we say thank you. Let us work collectively to protect their capacity to carry out this vital work safely and with dignity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Bahamas. And our next speaker is from France. France, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, parliamentarians, friends, despite the lessons of history and clear legal obligations, we are witnessing a collapse in the protection of civilians in armed conflict and a collapse in the respect for IHL. Let me quote Thomas Fletcher, the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, who spoke before the Security Council in May 2025. In 2024, there were more than 36,000 civilian deaths in the course of 14 armed conflicts. And sadly, the real numbers are probably much higher. The attacks on civilian infrastructures are higher, and that undermines electricity and water supplies. It also poses problems with respect to education and survival of local populations that cannot get what they need to get by. There's also increasing evidence of ill treatment and torture. The violence of conflict spares no one, even those who meet the needs of people in the field. Colleagues, I would like to recall two of the principles that underpin IHL, the principle of the distinction the clarity that attacks must be military exclusively rather than aiming at civilians or civilian infrastructure. And secondly, there is a principle of humanity. People who are not engaged in hostilities must be protected, the wounded, the ill, and civilians. As a French parliamentarian, I would like to talk to you about France's commitments. France appeals for strict implementation of IHL. We need to protect civilians when there is armed conflict. This in order to guarantee that humanitarian aid is provided. We'll be spending 500 million euros for Palestine, Sudan, Haiti, and elsewhere. We must support humanitarian workers, NGOs, and international organizations. This is a system that has been undermined by the drop in funding from the United States. We are, at the end of every year, will all have to decide on our budgets for next year. And I would like to tell you a bit about what we are doing with respect to the diplomacy budget. The fact that military budgets are swelling given new threats and the needs we have for collective security means that we must also ensure that we work very hard at diplomacy, and we must give priority to that as a means to settling disputes. Thank you.
Much, France. Our next speaker is IPNED, the International Parliamentary Network for Education. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to take the floor today for the International Parliamentary Network for Education to contribute to this vitally important debate. As we've heard throughout the debate over the last few days, we face the perfect storm of a massive upsurge in emergencies, armed violence, forced displacement, climate change, pandemics, and food insecurity, with the collapse of the systems and the practices which underpin international solidarity. This isn't so much a perfect storm as a toxic cocktail that is causing untold suffering and costing lives. As we've heard, the numbers are staggering. As we meet here in Geneva, 122 million people are forcibly displaced, and almost 310 are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. And as is so often the case, the most vulnerable are the most hardest hit. Did you know that 1 in every 5 children in the world are living in or fleeing conflict zones? Children caught up in crises often face the double jeopardy of losing their homes and their education. And sadly, education is often the poor cousin of an overstretched and underfunded humanitarian system. As a result, 234 million children are crisis affected and need urgent support, and 85 million of them are out of school. Depriving children in these conflicts of an education robs them not just of the opportunity to build skills, but also of a platform to receive life-saving support like food, water, and basic health care. However, the drastic cuts that we are seeing to development and humanitarian assistance are forcing many of the efforts to get those school children back into school to close. We're going to lose $3.2 billion between now and the end of the year of education funding for humanitarian assistance. And as you might have heard, UNHCR, the UN's refugee agency, has only received a quarter of what they need to provide support to refugees around the world. As a result, refugees, children in camps that host Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, just by way of example, 500,000 of them now are left without any form of schooling. As you also know, the vast majority of refugees around the world are hosted in low and middle income countries, whose education systems are often struggling to provide an education to their very own children. So in such cases, it's evident that host countries need support from the international community to provide the refugees they're hosting with access to education. Tragically, a lack of funding isn't the only issue that we face, and once again, education proves the point. In 2022-2023, there were 6,000 reports of attacks on education, and that represents a 20% increase on the previous 2 years. But for all of these issues, there is another way, and I would urge parliamentarians to take it. to reinforce humanitarian norms, and above all, to support humanitarian action. As the representatives of the people, we owe it to the people we represent all around the world to take up this fight and build new people-people relationships that do precisely that.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker comes from Netherlands. Netherlands, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman, dear colleagues. On behalf of the Netherlands delegation, it's a great honor to address you on the important theme of building a fair and sustainable global economy. The Netherlands is famous for its agricultural production, tulips, milk, cheese. I live in Andijk, which is in the middle of Seed Valley. Over 50% of world's vegetable seeds is produced there. In the Netherlands, in 1925, lived 7.3 million people. Nowadays, almost 18 million. The world population is growing. Climate change affects the most vulnerable, but so does hunger. I was inspired by 2 workshops in this assembly, breaking the hunger cycle and reducing methane for climate. I thought, which one is more important? However, the relationship between achieving enough food and climate goals is not just a matter of priorities, but one of simultaneous achievement. The aim is to achieve sustainable development by minimizing negative environmental impact and ensure the world population can be fed. Methane is a greenhouse gas, stronger than carbon dioxide. Nearly half of global methane emissions come from agricultural activities such as livestock and rice farming. Since global food demand is rising, those emissions tend to rise also. We need to adopt an integral approach to climate measures, such as changes to housing, feed or genetics, to prevent negative effects on food production. This includes win-win measures that simultaneously contribute to our climate and improve food security. For example, enhancing cow health to extend their lifespan, which reduces the carbon footprint and improves the quality. The goal is not to choose, but to work on food and climate at the same time. This includes monitoring technical solutions and economies of scale, and will only work with a level playing field. We need your commitment on both goals to ensure that progress in only one field does not come at the expense of the most vulnerable. So, IPU members, I call on you to join us to help prevent future humanitarian crises. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Netherlands. Our next speaker is from Mexico. Mexico, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Distinguished parliamentarians, upholding humanitarian norms needs active parliaments, responsible governments, and solid international communities that show solidarity. Supporting humanitarian action is a priority for Mexico. The Mexican Parliament has adopted legislation to ensure that international humanitarian law is fully integrated into our national legal framework. And we make sure that the state upholds its international commitments. We exercise effective oversight over our executive branch. We also allocate necessary budgetary resources and promote international parliamentary cooperation in order to strengthen the global response to humanitarian crises. Mexico is extremely concerned by the situation of migrants forced displaced populations, refugees whose vulnerability is exacerbated in today's world, where we see more than 122 million people forcibly displaced today. There are also migrants who have to flee because of extreme violence, poverty, environmental disasters, and there are alarming numbers of people in this situation. Especially children, girls, adolescents, unaccompanied minors. They face major threats such as exploitation, forced recruitment by organized crime, including for terrorism, sexual violence, and the constant threat to life and safety. And there is a lack of protection of those young people, in particular because of the restrictive policies of certain countries that exacerbate their suffering and force them to look for ever more dangerous migratory routes. Mexico recognizes the need for coordinated humanitarian responses based on human rights, international collaboration and solidarity among peoples. Parliaments play a key role in ensuring that national laws reflect international standards. And today, Mexico calls on this august assembly to explicitly refer in its recommendations to the protection of migrants and forcibly displaced on account of violence and terrorism. They should be some of our global humanitarian priorities. Mexico reiterates its commitment to humanitarian action based on dignity and solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mexico. And our next speaker is from Nigeria. Nigeria, you have the floor.
Honorable colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I bring warm greetings from President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and the President of the Nigerian Senate, Godswill Akpabio. We thank the IPU and our hosts here in Geneva for providing this platform where legislators from all regions can speak with one voice in defense of humanity. Our meeting comes at a time when the world faces multiple and overlapping humanitarian crises. Across Africa, we have seen the conflict in Sudan drive millions from their homes, and in the Sahel, violence and desertification continue to deepen food insecurity. In other parts, we see how what could appear as ethnic persecution or cleansing is often driven by fierce competition over vast mineral resources. And beyond Africa, the tragedies in Gaza and Ukraine reminds us of the heavy toll of war. Through all this, the IPU has shown that parliaments can make a difference. Partnerships such as the IPU and WHO partnership has strengthened the capacity of legislators worldwide to respond to health and humanitarian emergencies. The Committee on Human Rights has stood beside hundreds of parliamentarians at risk, and the recent call for action on the Sudan crisis has drawn vital attention to the suffering of more than 8 million displaced persons. These are concrete results that show what cooperation and political will can achieve. In Nigeria, our parliaments continue to strengthen laws and institutions that protect vulnerable citizens. The Northeast Development Commission, the Presidential Amnesty Program, and the Niger Delta Development Commission, where I serve as chairman of the Senate Oversight Committee, have all made significant interventions in crisis-affected communities across Nigeria. The National Assembly is also addressing the farmer-herder conflict, which has displaced thousands and threatened food security in parts of our country. Through dialogue, community peace building, and the implementation of new grazing and land use policies, we are working to transform these long-standing challenges into an opportunity for coexistence and rural development. Finally, let me stress that Nigerians' humanitarian concerns are complex, but they are not rooted in any pattern of religious persecution. Our Constitution and our conscience compels us to protect every citizen equally, regardless of faith or background. Simplifying these challenges into sectarian narrative risks undermining the real work of peace building. Once again, I deeply appreciate the great work the IPU is doing and believe above all we have set a template for parliamentary democracy and a more peaceful world. I wish us all peaceful deliberations. Thank you, and may God bless us all.
Nigeria, thank you very much. And our next speaker is from Ireland. Ireland, you have the floor.
Chair, distinguished colleagues, Díomh is mór an ordum a bheith anseo. It is indeed an honour to stand before you. Across our world today, conflict and displacement are tearing at the fabric of humanity. Millions are uprooted, millions go hungry, and too many have lost faith that the world still sees them. At this moment, it has never been more urgent to uphold the humanitarian norms, to stand up collectively for our shared humanity. Ireland is proud to be a steadfast and principled voice for humanitarian action. We are not the largest donor, but we are a consistent one and a committed one. As you may know, Ireland is a land of saints and scholars. Historically, religious missionaries, starting with Christian monks like St. Patrick and Columbanus, founded monasteries right across Europe, which later developed into the modern Catholic missionary movements in the 20th century that focused on establishing schools and hospitals abroad. In 2024, Ireland provided 310 million in humanitarian aid, and we will maintain that level in 2025. Our funding is flexible, predictable, and principled, designed to meet urgent and evolving needs. Reducing humanitarian suffering is at the heart of Ireland's foreign policy. Our efforts focus on the world's most severe crises in Sudan, Ukraine, Yemen, Myanmar, Afghanistan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And yes, Chair, in Gaza, where the Irish government has been unwavering in its support for the Palestinian people and its call for an immediate ceasefire, humanitarian access, and a just and lasting peace. But colleagues, let us speak plainly. The humanitarian system is under unbearable strain. Conflicts are more entrenched and brutal than at any point in recent memory. Civilians, our mothers, our fathers, and our children are paying the highest price. The deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure, the use of explosive weapons in our towns and cities, these are acts that defy international law and defy our shared moral duty. Ireland will continue to act, to stand with those in need, to speak out where others fall silent, and to insist that compassion and justice must guide our response to human suffering. Let us leave this assembly not just with words, but with a renewed resolve to make humanity once again the heart of international politics. Thank you, delegates.
Thank you very much, Ireland. And our next speaker is from Armenia. Armenia, you have the floor.
Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues. When we speak today about upholding humanitarian norms and supporting humanitarian action in times of crisis, we are reminded that these principles are not only about responding to emergencies. They are about protecting the very essence of what makes us human: compassion, dignity, and peace. I come from Armenia, a nation that knows too well the pain of conflict and displacement, but also the strength of resilience and the power of hope. For decades, our region has witnessed war, loss, and suffering. Generations have grown up knowing fear instead of trust, separation instead of cooperation. Yet today, Armenia has chosen a different path, the path of peace. We are committed to building a future of reconciliation and coexistence with our neighbor, Azerbaijan. This is not an easy path. It demands courage to overcome the wounds and the past and faith that dialogue can replace division. But it is the only path that truly honors humanitarian values. Because peace itself is the highest form of humanitarian action, it prevents crises before they happen. It heals communities before they break, and it allows children to dream of something greater than survival. Dear colleagues, in times of crisis, the world often looks to humanitarian actors to bring relief. But let us also remember our duty, as parliamentarians, to prevent those crises, to ensure that the principles of humanity, impartiality, and solidarity guide not only aid workers in the field, but policymakers in our chambers. Armenia stands ready to work with all nations to transform our shared pain into shared progress. We believe that peace is possible when it is built on respect for human rights, recognition of suffering, and sincere commitment of justice. Let this assembly to be a reminder that humanitarian norms do not end where borders begin. They are universal, they belong to all people in every crisis, in every land. May our collective voice today be a voice for peace, for dignity, and for the belief that even after the darkest storm, humanity can still choose the light. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armenia. And our next speaker is from Montenegro. Montenegro, you have the floor.
Distinguished delegates, colleagues, and friends, today, as conflicts multiply and geopolitical tensions deepen, our world faces an undeniable truth. Smaller and developing states are not just bystanders. They are frontline actors in the struggle for peace, democracy, and human dignity. As a representative of Montenegro, a small state committed to democracy, stability, and European values, I know that the strength of a nation is not measured by size, but by its dedication to dialogue and the rule of law. We live in an era defined by uncertainty, shifting global alliances, economic challenges, climate emergencies, and humanitarian crises affecting over 300 million people worldwide. In this complex environment, the strength of democracy is tasted by parliaments, and parliaments play a decisive role in how nations respond. For smaller states in particular, democratization is not a luxury, it's a survival. Strong, transparent parliaments safeguard sovereignty, prevent corruption, and ensure that humanitarian and development aid truly reach those in need. They are the institutions that gave legitimacy to governments and stability to nations. Yet global politics today often tilts toward power rather than principle. The rise of multipolar competition risks sidelining smaller nations and weakening multilateral cooperation. That is why gatherings like the IPU matters. Because they reaffirm that every nation, regardless of size and wealth, have a voice and a responsibility in shaping global norms. Colleagues, the path toward democracy and peace is not measured by power, but by principle. Smaller states may lack size, but not significance. When they build resilient democratic institutions, they became anchors of stability in a turbulent world. Let us therefore reaffirm our shared duty to protect humanitarian norms, to defend democracy everywhere, and to ensure that in this changing world, every nation stands with equal dignity, equal responsibility, and equal voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is from Portugal. But maybe before Portugal takes the podium, I want to say thank you very much. It has been good to work with you, and you have been good to me. And it is my humble request and plea that you continue to be good to my sister from Turkey, and the leader of the delegation. Thank you very much. Portugal, you have the floor.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
Well, thank you very much. Chair, distinguished colleagues, Your Excellencies, we live in a time of multiplying crises, conflicts, climate disasters, forced displacements, and growing inequalities. Each of these challenges not only tests our policies, but also the very humanity we share. In light of this, reaffirming the value of multilateralism is essential. Only through cooperation between nations can we face common challenges, from peace and security to climate preservation, from access to essential goods to sustainable development. But multilateralism can only endure if it is based on what the world needs most today: trust between peoples. This precious asset has been lost, and we must regain it. One of the simplest ways is to take advantage of this Inter-parliamentary Union to promote sincere bilateral meetings, even if they are forced with sympathy, that lead us to look at each other, to get to know each other, to listen to each other, and, in the end, perhaps to understand each other better. Why not? This is the only way to build trust, and without trust, no multilateralism can survive. But peace and the trust that sustains it cannot be maintained without a firm commitment to humanitarian action. No conflict, ideology, or national interest justifies disrespect for human dignity. International humanitarian law must always be respected. When hospitals are attacked or humanitarian workers are prevented from acting, it is not only the law that is violated, it is the very notion of humanity that is called into question. Violating it means accepting that some lives are worth less than others, that the weakest human beings can be despised or eliminated, a path to barbarism and autocracy. And when that idea takes hold, we all lose. Parliaments have then an essential role to play, transforming commitments into policies, overseeing governments and ensuring that aid reaches those who need it. And it is through the parliamentary diplomacy, which this union represents so well, that we can strengthen international institutions and bring peoples together around common values, among them development, human rights and respect for humanitarian law. Your Excellencies, it is up to us, even in the darkest moments, to be the persistent voice of humanity and to learn the necessary lessons from history, because the strength of a parliament and of a nation is measured not by the power it wields, but by its ability to protect those most in need. Thank you very much.
Now, the speaker from New Zealand, please.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Rachel Brooking and I am from the Labour Party in New Zealand, but I am giving this speech on behalf of my colleague Stuart Smith, who is from the National Party. So we are at opposite ends of the political spectrum, but agree on this issue. He has had to return to New Zealand because there are fires in his electorate. And this is the point, that New Zealand are no strangers to adversity. We have a lot of perils. From the devastating Canterbury earthquakes in 2010 and 2011 to the Kaikoura quake, where Stuart is from, in 2016, and more recently, the destruction wrought by Cyclone Gabriel in 2023. Our communities have faced immense challenges, and each time Parliament has stood up and responded. Following Cyclone Gabriel, we passed the Severe Weather Emergency Recovery Legislation Act. This was not just a piece of legislation, it was a lifeline. It gave our local authorities the tools they needed to act swiftly, to rebuild and to support their communities. It followed the precedent set by previous governments in response to the Canterbury and Kaikoura earthquakes. These laws are proof that when disaster strikes, Parliament of different striped governments can act decisively and responsibly, and then Parliament can undertake a post-enactment review. But recovery is not just about bricks and mortar, it is about people. It's about the welfare of those who have lost homes, livelihoods and loved ones, and successive governments have recognised this. Colleagues, Stuart and I are proud of the role Parliament has played in supporting New Zealanders through these difficult times. It is incumbent on parliamentarians to continue to work together to ensure that when the next challenge comes, and it will, we are ready to meet it with strength, unity and compassion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I call Paraguay.
Distinguished President, colleagues, fellow parliamentarians from around the world, a very good morning. I represent Paraguay, a country that has experienced the tragedy of war, and in particular, one war that really marked our history, the War of the Triple Alliance, which almost exterminated our entire nation. 70% of the population was exterminated. But Paraguayan women rebuilt the country from those ashes, and Paraguay rested on these women's shoulders, and I can say that the Paraguayan nation exists thanks to its women. Paraguay today has that experience of resilience and a history of peace that was hard fought with its great effort and with a faith in human dignity, dialogue, and respect for international humanitarian law. We ratified the Geneva Conventions and all its additional protocols, and we incorporated them into our national legal order. And we adopt the necessary budgets to implement them. I also speak to you as a mother, a woman, and one of those who has rebuilt our nation. And I say loud and clear, and I'm not just speaking on my own behalf, but I'm speaking on behalf of those who suffer most from these crises, women and young girls who represent 70% of victims globally. The world isn't just complex, it's facing a moral crisis. 120 armed conflicts around the world are not just empty figures, but we're talking about hospitals that are being bombed, schools destroyed, women, the victims of sexual assault, children who have been kidnapped. We're not talking about regular or irregular wars. We're talking about crimes, human trafficking, child trafficking. And what we need to do is to speak up very clearly from the depth of our own humanity. Humanitarian rules aren't just legal texts, but they are the last wall of defense. Respecting them is protecting the very essence of humanity. We must remember that humanitarian action isn't charity, it's justice. And justice can only exist when there is equality, real equality. And as parliamentarians, we cannot sit back and watch, be spectators. We must adopt laws urgently, we must exercise oversight effectively, and we must cooperate at the global level among parliaments. Parliaments must transform international humanitarian law into effective national laws and ensure that humanitarian action isn't undermined by economic or political interests. So Paraguay reiterates its commitment to non-intervention and the peaceful settlement of disputes. And we advocate for constructive dialogue between the Republic of China, Taiwan, and the People's Republic of China. We believe that Taiwan should participate in international fora. 23 million people in Taiwan also deserve to be protected. Colleagues, let's not waste our time with empty speeches. Let's remember that humanity must remain at the very heart of our politics, because every protected life, every child protected that goes back to the playground means that we are investing in the real objective of this Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mauritania, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. شكرا سيدة الرئيسة. سيداتي وسادتي السادة أصحاب السعادة.
Madam President, distinguished colleagues, fellow parliamentarians, participants, it's a pleasure to join you here at this Inter-parliamentary Assembly and this debate on upholding humanitarian norms and ensuring that we have ways of dealing with the over 120 conflicts underway in the world and the 310 million people who require humanitarian help. The wave of violence currently underway is a threat to all of us. It is a matter of conscience and humanity that compels us to adopt stronger and more effective positions. We must find ways of tackling violence. We must find ways of strengthening the values of peace, security, and coexistence. I appeal to all of you. This assembly must be a key moment in the life of the Inter-parliamentary Union and to highlight our commitment to international humanitarian law. In Mauritania, under the guidance and policies of our head of state, we take a strong position on social justice and geopolitical balance. Since our president came to power, he has made the well-being and rights of our people at the very center of his government and at the top of his priorities. We must note that in the light of the situation obtaining in the Sahel, we have strengthened our policy with respect for IHL and human rights. Given the number of displaced people and refugees, over 500,000 refugees are in Mauritania. We have also provided assistance to those living under threat. We have recently experienced one of the worst series of crimes against humanity in witnessing what has happened in Gaza. We have seen the destruction of hospitals, of schools, civilian homes. This conflict has generated huge numbers of victims, particularly women. The Gaza crimes against humanity cannot remain unpunished. We must ensure that those responsible are brought before the International Criminal Court. The state of Israel has shown that it is an entity without any respect for human rights or international law or IHL. There has also been an attack against a sister state, that is to say Qatar, this flouting any rules of peaceful coexistence or international law. We would urge that international pressure be brought to bear so that those responsible for the attack on Qatar be brought to justice. Schools, hospitals, places of worship were not spared in the attack on Gaza. We really must ensure that we do everything we can as soon as possible to establish an international fund to help support Gaza and help them tackle this situation. Thank you.
Speaker is from Niger. Yes.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, speakers, distinguished participants, I should like at the outset to thank this assembly of our organization, the IPU, for having welcomed our country, Niger, back into the IPU family. I would also like to say that the Advisory Council for the Refoundation of Niger is ready and willing to work with other parliaments for peace, security, and stability throughout the world. Madam President, the theme of this assembly, upholding humanitarian norms and supporting humanitarian action in times of crisis, shows how important our parliaments consider humanitarian work to be. Humanitarian work and the recognition that crime must have no color, geography, or politics. We must ensure that we consider all people and their political choices in a neutral, impartial way without any intervention in the domestic affairs of any state. I would like to remind you of the humanitarian crisis in the Sahel, particularly in the alliance of the states of the Sahel, of which Niger is a member, with Mali and Burkina Faso. This part of the Sahel is undergoing a proxy war and terrorism, which is being funded in order to destabilize our states and cause chaos. This is causing civilian victims, displaced people, and the closure of schools and health centers. It is also making it impossible for our countries to implement their development policies. Peace and stability should not be a luxury. Countries of the Sahel Alliance, and particularly Niger, consider terrorism to be a source of destabilization, immigration, and humanitarian crisis. That is why we feel that no one should be funding or training terrorism or intervening in our country. This in the interest of our development. We would call for a clear, transparent management of resources available for humanitarian work, and that work should be done with areas where there is a risk of terrorism so that there is fair and balanced development. The countries of the Sahel Alliance would appeal to governments and investors to ensure that they do everything they can to work with us for peace and security. Long live honest humanitarian work, and long live the IPU. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Now we are moving to List D, young parliamentarians. I call Tunisia.
السيدة الرئيسة، الزميلات والزملاء أعضاء.
Madam President, distinguished fellow parliamentarians, I'm speaking to you as a young Tunisian parliamentarian. Tunisia is a country that believes in democracy and the values of freedom and equality. We have a new generation of parliamentarians that believes that their voice can make a difference, particularly when it is a matter of human dignity and the protection of people in times of crisis. It's a pleasure for me to be joining you in this debate on a matter that goes to the very heart of our humanity, and that is to say, to uphold humanitarian norms and supporting humanitarian action in times of crisis. And I'm talking about a key issue here, and that is to say that the role women have to play when it comes to humanitarian norms and work. There is an obligation to respect humanitarian norms as a matter of justice, and this is what was said in the Security Council Resolution 1325, which stated that the protection of women in times of crisis and the need for their effective participation in peace building was a matter of international priority. However, this resolution has not really been respected. How can it be that we have had the violations that the Zionist entity has perpetrated against women? Imagine a Palestinian woman enduring destruction who is constantly having to do what she can to find bread for her children. A woman in a hospital giving birth when there are bombs falling on her and having to then live under such bombardment. How is it possible to deal with a situation where you're having to bury your dead at night? Where is the international conscience? Where is our sense of moral priorities, which has us all working together in order to deal with this? Each and every one of us is a human being before being a parliamentarian. You are women, you are sisters. How could you remain silent in the face of this disgrace? What can we possibly teach our children if we remain silent in the face of this situation? We parliamentarians are not mere observers. We are the conscience that should have reactions when others remain silent. We must ensure that Resolution 1325 is indeed implemented.
You have the floor.
Madam President, colleagues, just recently, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs talked about Gaza and the humanitarian crisis there. A great deal is expected of international organizations: food, health care, and basic services required for an exhausted and starving civilian population. There is a need for humanitarian convoys, and we all know what the needs are. But you also have to think of the Ukrainian civilian population. Let me remind you of France's constant ongoing support since the very first days of the war. And we have had health and education services affected, as well as transport and all infrastructures. So millions of children have seen their lives threatened. We have a situation where 1 out of 3 Ukrainians are going to need humanitarian aid in the course of this year. The intensification in densely populated urban areas and the number of non-state fighters means that we are in a situation that is increasingly difficult for the implementation of IAL. Given this situation and the increasing number of people in distress, over 310 million people, that is to say close to the population of the United States, is in need of help. We cannot remain inactive, particularly given that the American funding has been withdrawn, which means the international organizations are suffering. We must ensure that we need to do what we can to make up for the withdrawal of American funding. That is why France is doing what it can, and we have done what we can. France, Brazil, South Africa, Kazakhstan, and the ICRC have acted and backed a resolution on the importance of IHL and its support. And we have also done everything we can to ensure that it's understood that aid needs to be made available as fast as possible. And we need to ensure that the kinds of reforms being proposed to ensure that things are dealt with better will be considered by the end of this month. We have to bear in mind that there are people who are suffering, and it's a universal fact that civilians are always the one who pay the highest price in times of war. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Uruguay, you have the floor.
It's okay now. Soy del sur y vengo.
I am the South and I come from the South. This was how one of our last presidents who died recently had to say, and he was talking about he was one of the millions of South Americans dealing with a situation of huge inequality, which meant that the poor became poorer and the rich ever richer. A situation where youngs had their present and their future threatened because of the lack of opportunities. I believe in a state that provides for equal opportunities, and that is that avoids being a state where drug trafficking is an option after schooling, and where the life is such that our entire continent has young people's mental health under threat, which is a truth throughout the world. Young people need work, quality work, in order to ensure that they can plan for their futures. And they also need leisure time. They need time for culture. They need time for their own private lives. This must not be a privilege. I am the South and I am from the South. Now, I think we must bear in mind that over the last few days we've been hearing about situations and political activities which give us a global understanding of the world. And I do think that we need to bear in mind what our huge responsibilities are. And I do think that young parliamentarians have an obligation to ensure that we improve our political lives, because we have to ensure that the new generation actually lives up to its responsibilities to ensure that we bring about improved living conditions for our people. We also need to ensure that women are independent, that young people get work, that workers have quality jobs, and that we can do everything we can to protect our world and to ensure that we change our role as parliamentarians to ensure that the world is just a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I call Ireland.
Accordia. It's more an honour dum lauert an seo aniu ar san na hÉireann. I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak as a young parliamentarian from Ireland today. The Irish Constitution contains a commitment to the rule of international law, and this is one of the core principles of Irish foreign policy. During our term as an elected member of the UN Security Council from 2021 to 2022, Ireland consistently called for compliance with international humanitarian law and accountability for IHL violations. The persistent problem for IHL is the frequent failure by some states to respect the existing rules. Unfortunately, there is a very concerning trend of seeking to interpret those rules so loosely that their intended protective effect is either severely reduced or nullified. Ireland is concerned by these trends and is firmly committed to the implementation of international humanitarian law and to efforts to strengthen compliance with it. Ireland would like to see the interpretation of IHL continue to adapt to react to new developments in armed conflict, including the use of drones and cyber attacks in conflict zones. We are seeking to strengthen and promote adherence to IHL within Ireland as well as abroad, and our National Committee on International Humanitarian Law has continued to meet regularly. The National Committee provides an effective means of promoting wider knowledge of IHL within the state system, and we are currently in the process of preparing its first voluntary national report on domestic implementation of IHL. As part of this exercise, in July 2023, Ireland published a national position paper on the application of international law to cyberspace. We strongly feel that cyber operations will take place in the context of armed conflict must be regulated by international humanitarian law. International humanitarian law must grow to evolve to match developments in armed conflict, and we must ensure to have a robust legal structure in place to ensure justice after the fact and to act as a deterrent against future harm. In Ireland, we have had a successful peace process, which we believe can be another example to other regions in conflict. There is still much more to be done in terms of reconciliation, and we are striving to end partition in our country and to secure a united Ireland. But this can only be achieved peacefully, and that again shows the power of respectful dialogue. Let us use our voices for peace and justice and not be afraid to call out violations of international law and make sure that there is accountability for all who violate. Garmila Mahagwev, agus Saoirse in Palestine.
Thank you very much. Now, Bulgaria, you have the floor.
Honorable President, distinguished colleagues, today, as we gather in Geneva, the city where the Geneva Conventions were born, we are reminded that humanitarian norms are not abstract principles. Across the world, over 120 armed conflicts are ongoing. More than 120 million people have been forcibly displaced, and 310 million need humanitarian assistance. Behind each number, there is a name, a loss, and a hope that the world will not look away. In a time of growing conflicts, polarization, and disinformation, strong political commitment to ensure respect for international humanitarian law is more necessary than ever. Bulgaria stands firmly by the conviction that respect for international humanitarian law is not optional. It is a moral and legal obligation. This year, we mark 70 years since the Geneva Conventions entered into force in Bulgaria. We remain fully committed to ensuring and overseeing their implementation through our National Committee on International Humanitarian Law. But rules and institutions alone are not enough. Humanitarian action begins with people and with empathy. Since 2023, Bulgaria has doubled its resettlement quota for forcibly displaced persons and made 9 new pledges under the Global Refugee Forum, focused on children, integration, and education. Additionally, the UNHCR Bulgaria has built the Compass network of protection and inclusion centers, which offer legal aid, education, and support, not only to refugees, but to local communities. We must continue working across all our countries to integrate displaced people and offer them a new sense of belonging. Dear colleagues, as representatives of the people, we as parliamentarians are uniquely positioned to mobilize political will, challenge narratives, and be the voice of the most vulnerable. Let's prove that even in times of division, humanity can still unite across one principle: that every life deserves protection and that those who violate this duty must be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Malta, you have the floor.
Dear Chair, colleagues and delegates, It is a great honor to speak before you today as the young parliamentarian representing Malta, led by our Speaker of the House of the Representatives, Angelo Farrugia, at this Inter-parliamentary conference. In time of crisis, whether caused by war, forced migration, or natural disaster, protecting humanitarian values is not only a legal duty, but also a sign of shared humanity. These values, which guide international humanitarian law, remind us to always act with dignity, fairness, and compassion. Malta continues to stand firmly by these principles. Our foreign policy gives strong importance to humanitarian work through our official development assistance and humanitarian aid policy. This policy supports the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and focuses on solidarity, human rights, and protecting civilian needs. Because of Malta's location in the Mediterranean, we are often at the center of migration and humanitarian challenges. To respond, our government works closely with international partners, such as the International Organization for Migration, UNHCR, and the Red Cross. Together, we help to provide shelter, mental health support, and integration programs for displaced people. Our Civil Protection Department also plays an important role in cooperation emergency response, both in Malta and as part of the EU Civil Protection Mechanism. Malta also believes that humanitarian action should go beyond emergency aid. It should include preparation, building community resilience, and supporting long-term recovery. We believe affected people should have a say in rebuilding their lives, and their cooperation between nations should be based on honesty, fairness, and respect for each country's independence. As parliamentarians, it is our duty to run humanitarian values into real laws and actions. Let this conference renew our shared commitment, not just in words, but through clear, practical steps that protect the vulnerable and uphold the dignity of every person. I thank you.
Thank you. Now, Nigeria, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, respected parliamentarians, I bring you warm greetings from the Federal Republic of Nigeria and extend my appreciation to the Inter-parliamentary Union for creating a platform where we can collectively advance humanitarian norms in the face of today's complex crisis. Our theme, upholding humanitarian norms and supporting humanitarian action in times of crisis, is not distant or theoretical for us in Nigeria and across the world. Crises are not just events, they are ongoing realities. From armed conflict and insurgency to displacement caused by climate shocks and to the struggles of food insecurity are caught in cycles of vulnerabilities. In every crisis, whether in war zones, climate disasters, or mass displacement, it is young people who inherit the longest shadows of conflict and neglect. Yet, despite this, they are too often seen only as victims or passive observers. As a young legislator and the chairman of the House of Representatives in Nigeria on students' loan, we are working to ensure that students from crisis regions receive special attention in the disbursement of student loans. Education must remain a right, not a casualty, even in times of crisis. But support for vulnerable populations cannot be effective without coordination. One major challenge we face is the lack of access and updated information on donor agencies operating in crisis zones. There is an urgent need for structured data sharing frameworks between humanitarian actors and national governments. Transparency breeds efficiency. Humanitarian norms are not abstract ideals, they are promises we make to humanity that even in darkest times, we must protect life, dignity, and hope. So I urge this assembly, let us commit not only to protecting humanitarian space, but to expanding it. Let us place young people at the heart of decision-making, not on the margins. Include them in peace processes, fund their initiatives, let them sit at the table not as a token voice, but as equal partners. This will guarantee a future where humanitarian norms are upheld, not just in treaties, but in practice. It must be a future co-created with the youth. In conclusion, I urge this assembly to continue building frameworks that do not just respond to crises, but anticipate and prevent them while centering human dignity and equity in all our actions. I thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you. Now, Singapore, you have the floor.
Madam President, Singapore has always championed the rules-based multilateral system. We acceded to the Geneva Conventions in 1973, 8 years after our independence, because we understood international humanitarian law protects us all. But commitment means more than words. Singapore has provided annual contributions to UNHCR since 2001. We work closely with the Singapore Red Cross to deliver aid regionally and beyond. Our armed forces incorporate IHL training at every level, and we actively participate in regional consultations on emerging challenges from autonomous weapons to cyber warfare. Singapore has moved to de-friction humanitarian funding. Our parliament approved the 2024 budget that created a 100% tax deduction for overseas humanitarian donations from 2025 to 2028. Regionally, we invest in local responders and regular armed forces deployments. Local capacity is and must be the first and last mile of humanitarian action. We pair relief with long-term investments in the development of fellow developing countries. The Singapore Cooperation Programme, or SCP, established in 1992, is Singapore's platform for extending technical assistance and sharing governance and systems know-how. The SCP has hosted close to 150,000 officials from more than 180 countries and territories, as well as international and regional organizations. With such actions in raising local humanitarian funding, investing in local actors, and fostering economic development, we hope to play our role in tackling humanitarian problems as effectively and as structurally as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, conference. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Dan Carden, a Member of Parliament in the United Kingdom representing the city of Liverpool. We meet at a moment when the language of humanitarianism is invoked more often than it is heeded. The gap between what is proclaimed and what is practiced on the ground has grown shamefully wide, and closing it is not a question of intentions, but one of power, legitimacy, and political will. The Assembly is right to affirm the importance of humanitarian norms, the sanctity of human life, but we should be candid about the forces that sustain or corrode them. Principles endure only when rooted in institutions capable of enforcing them, and those institutions draw their strength from the consent of people. And parliaments are essential to this task. We may not be the ones negotiating ceasefires, but we shape the political conditions that make them possible. And there is in fora of this sort a recurring belief that moral consensus can substitute for political and economic settlement. But this way, humanitarianism winds up admired, cited, and ignored. Multilateralism must be more than the rhetoric of values. It must mean something to the people whose lives and taxes sustain it. The same realism should guide our approach to the Assembly's subject item of illegal international adoption and to ongoing wars and growing civil unrest. Nothing will substitute for politics grounded in democratic consent, especially as it's worth saying at an occasion like this, the issues of aid and immigration in many developed countries have become politically divisive footballs. When international bodies act without regard for these essential principles of democratic consent, they risk appearing as moral custodians without a mandate. But our parliaments are capable of building the democratic consent for the action needed to end wars and meet the scale of human need. If we can heal the division and polarization sustained by modern online communication and the political extremes. Internationalism rests on our capacity to turn compassion into credible action, to protect humanitarian workers, and to deliver essential aid and protect human life. Congress, thank you.
Thank you. Canada, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Are we doing okay? Can I just do a health check with everybody that is here today? Okay. My name is Ikra Khalid. I'm the Member of Parliament in Mississauga, Erin Mills. Look, I'll be honest with you guys. For the past 100 years, we've built multilateral organizations, we've fostered dialogues, we've made countless speeches, and yet here we are, facing humanitarian crises that have shattered lives, that have displaced millions of people, and have tested the moral strength of our global community. And we all share the blame. Our democratic systems that we built were designed to prevent exactly the situation that we are in right now. We were designed to create societies grounded in the rule of law, to create equality and to create justice, societies where people not only live together, but thrive together. Democracy is not a slogan. It is a tool, a living, evolving instrument through which we build cohesive, compassionate, and fair communities. And as parliamentarians, we are the wielders of that tool. It is our duty and our responsibility to ensure that democracy continues to serve its true purpose, and that is to build equality of opportunity for every human being. Equality of opportunity is the foundation of prosperity and of trust, but over the years, we've let it erode. When young people are excluded from democratic systems, we lose innovation, passion, and boldness that we need to solve humanitarian challenges of our time, from climate change to conflict, to fight for human rights, to land and rights to our bodily autonomy. Democracy needs to be recalibrated, not replaced, to meet the realities of our changing world. So I challenge us collectively to really be bold and bring in the innovation that young people have to solve the challenges of our time, to hold justice and accountability as pillars of how we function as democracies in our world. We need to be prudent enough to empower young to lead in business, in science, and in civic reform, in artificial intelligence and in technology, because when we're talking about humanitarian crises, they only occur because we have let democracy fail, because we have let equality of opportunity fail, and we have let power be consolidated in small little pockets and not be distributed to the entirety of our civilization. Every single life matters, and we, as the IPU, have the opportunity to make sure that we are putting every single life at the forefront of how we conduct politics. And let me be clear, politics has no place in human rights. We need to make sure that we are collaborating and being inclusive and making sure that equality of opportunity is at the forefront of how we conduct ourselves as democracies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Russia, you have the floor.
colleagues, distinguished colleagues, for me it's a great honor and privilege for me to speak on behalf of the young parliamentarians of the Russian Federation, respecting humanitarian norms and supporting humanitarian action in times of crisis. This is a very broad subject, of course, and we see that there is a growing aspiration to a genuine sense of equality around the world, regardless of ethnic background, citizenship, or the country. What we want is people to benefit from genuine protections and to respect the dignity of their lives. In the time of global upheavals, international humanitarian law plays a special role. Our common goal as parliamentarians is to stand up in defense of international law. The future of humanity depends on our ability to stand up for the fundamental humanitarian values and to make sure that they become reality. Russian parliamentarians are always ready to share their experience. Despite the unprecedented sanctions, Russia is proactive in its humanitarian activities across many countries and regions, and it is one of the world leaders in this regard. As of August 2025, Russia carried out 9 emergency humanitarian response operations, and young people play a very important role in these processes. I think that more and more young people have to be involved in humanitarian initiatives. There is a very big share of young people under the age of 35 in Red Cross missions, humanitarian missions. Tens of thousands of young volunteers across Russia were involved in emergency relief operations. They often do this without arms. All they have for protection is a Red Cross badge and the rules we agreed to abide by. These people are the embodiment of the Geneva Conventions, and they live up to their promises. We live in turbulence. We're tested by various challenges, but there is a foundation, the principle of humanity, and it should be not just what politicians talk about. This must be what we do as young people. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Armenia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, dear colleagues. It is an honor to address you today on a topic that resonates deeply with my country and our people: upholding humanitarian norms and supporting humanitarian action in times of crisis. We meet at a time when global crises, wars, forced displacements, natural disasters continue to test the resilience of international law and the strength of our collective moral. At the heart of this crisis lies a fundamental question: do we, as a global community, have the will to place human dignity above political divisions? For Armenia, it is not an abstract debate. This is our lived experience. In recent years, our region has faced serious conflicts and humanitarian tragedy. Families have been displaced, lives lost, and trust between neighbors harmed. Yet today we stand at a crossroad. Armenia and Azerbaijan have initiated a peace agreement on August 8, 2025, that could mark a historical turning point. But peace is not only about signing documents. It must be rooted in humanitarian values. Respecting international humanitarian law means ensuring the rights and safety of displaced persons, protecting cultural heritage, and providing humanitarian assistance without discrimination. These are not favors, they are obligations we all share as members of the international community. This peace agreement is more than a bilateral arrangement. It is a test case. Can two countries, long divided by conflict, build settlement based on humanitarian norms? If we succeed, it will send a powerful message beyond our borders that even in times of deepest crisis, respect for humanity can lead to a path of peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Thailand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished colleagues, it's a great honor to be here again on behalf of young parliamentarians of Thailand. Regarding Cambodia issues as our close and valuable neighbor, the situation along our border, one Thailand neither saw it or benefits from it. We did not initiate this conflict, and we regret its occurrence. Peace is not a matter of territory. It is a matter of trust, stability, and shared humanity. Thailand respects sovereignty. We are fully committed to the ceasefire. Peace is the foundation of progress, not only for Thailand or Cambodia, it's for all. In the late 70s, Thailand opened up the borders for hundreds of thousands of Cambodians fleeing the civil war to seek shelter in Thailand. It was an act of compassion and humanitarian principle. Although the wall has ended and the shelter was closed, the Cambodian village were expanded over decades. We have repeatedly protested. However, Cambodia never responded or taken any action to resolve the issue. Regarding the 18 Cambodian prisoners of war, they are treated accordingly to the international humanitarian laws, particularly the Third Geneva Convention. They have been provided with medical service. ICRC has full access. They will be released and repatriated upon the cessation of hostilities. As a young parliamentarian, I've learned that peace must be protected every day. Thailand remains committed to resolving differences through peaceful means, with good faith and sincerity. Let our border not divide, but become bridges of cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ecuador, you have the floor.
Muy buenos días.
A very good day, fellow parliamentarians. It's an honor to address you, representing the Ecuadorian National Assembly, the youngest assembly in our history, and with most women than ever before, with fresh ideas and a determination to continue to build a new Ecuador. We're a young parliament with strong female participation, and we're engaged in, and that's thanks to a number of reforms that we've engaged in. But quota policies must also be supported by the trust and determination of political parties to make it work. And there I want to underscore the commitment of Daniel Noboa, our president, in giving confidence in young people, not to appointing them in secondary roles, but in major roles where we are working to transform our country. Ecuador also reaffirms that international cooperation isn't a luxury. It's a global imperative, in particular today, where organized crime, terrorism, and corruption threaten all of our countries. No one can deal with these challenges alone. And Ecuador hands out its hand to the world to share its views on strengthening justice and building security mechanisms to protect the life and freedom of our nations. We reiterate our commitment to respect international treaties and conventions and to strengthen multilateral mechanisms. We live in an interconnected world, and we must stay together. Ecuador has chosen to move forward. We have a new generation of politicians, and as young politicians, we look forward to that work, because work that we do as young parliamentarians may open the door to future generations so that they can continue to participate in politics too. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Peru, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, a very good afternoon, Madam President. We're living in times of conflict, humanitarian crisis, where children, the elderly, and women and displaced persons are suffering more than anyone else. And in that context, humanitarian norms are legal undertakings and ethical commitments which are the duty of member states to respect. And parliamentarians must ensure that laws ensure the protection of civilians, accountability for violations, and effective access to humanitarian action. Humanity cannot simply stand by and watch. Peru has a strong determination to compliance with international humanitarian law and the promotion of human rights law. We have concerns in our country among the international community for the recent adoption of the amnesty law, which protects members of the armed forces and the national police that were prosecuted and sentenced for the commission of serious crimes against humanity. And the use of force may be necessary for states, but it must nevertheless be in accordance with the law and the principle of proportionality. This assembly is the right place to reaffirm our commitment to guarantee compliance with humanitarian norms and support humanitarian action with a view to seeking dignity and justice for our peoples. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the general debate. I have an announcement to make. The afternoon session starts at 3 p.m. with the presentation of new publications and the accountability segment. Everyone is welcome to contribute to it. Thank you.